Hey there, survivors. Thanks for tuning in to tonight's episode. If you're new here, please consider subscribing. It really helps me keep these stories coming. And while you're here, let me know in the comments where you're listening from. Now let's get started. I'm Daniel Sinclair, a traveler from Vancouver, Canada. France had always been on my list, a destination I'd dreamed of visiting since my teenage years. I grew up captivated by films that brought Paris to life, the glow of streetlights, the buzz of sidewalk cafes, the endless inspiration of its art scene. Montmartre, in particular, felt almost mythical to me. Its winding alleys, the hidden courtyards, the artists sketching beneath the looming silhouette of the basilica. It was the kind of place that belonged in novels and old photographs. When I finally saved enough and carved out the time, I didn't hesitate. I booked the trip. But I never imagined that by the time I arrived, the city I had longed to see would already be slipping into chaos. I landed at Charles de Gaulle Airport late in the afternoon. The plan was to head straight to my small hotel in Montmartre, rest a bit, then get an early start exploring the area the next day. The moment I stepped off the plane, I sensed something odd in the airport's atmosphere. A few employees looked distracted. The lines for customs moved slowly, and the staff exchanged anxious glances. One official quietly discussed something with another, their gestures quick and urgent, though they tried to keep their voices down. I assumed it might be a standard alert about something typical, like an unattended bag or a passenger who needed assistance. Nobody made any announcements, and no one hurried us along. People were in line clutching suitcases and passports, a little irritated from the long wait. I shrugged it off as an inconvenience. That changed when I reached the agent checking passports. She inspected my passport for an unusually long time, studying my face and the date of arrival. She finally stamped it without a word and gestured for me to continue. I took the RER-B train from the airport to Gare du Nord. The train was busier than I expected. Several passengers were coughing or covering their faces with scarves or masks. I remember one man rubbing his eyes and trying not to touch anyone around him. A few folk scrolled through news feeds on their phones, some of them gasping or muttering. I couldn't see what they were reading, but their expressions changed from mild interest to open distress. When I reached Gare du Nord, I was relieved to be above ground. The crowds on the platforms were frantic, and the announcements over the station's speakers sounded unclear. I found a small taxi stand in front of the station and hopped into one of the cars. My driver, a middle-aged man named Alain, seemed agitated. He kept the radio on and was listening to a report in French. Although I only understood parts of it, I caught words like infection, virus, and anomalies. The tone was urgent, and the broadcaster spoke rapidly, as if new details were coming in by the minute. Alain switched off the radio and turned to me. In halting English, he asked if I had heard anything about a virus on the news back in Canada. I told him I was only aware of some discussion about a sickness in isolated areas, but nothing about France. He gave me a worried nod, then focused on driving again. We arrived at my hotel in Montmartre about 15 minutes later. The place was called Hôtel Lumière Montmartre. It wasn't large or luxurious, but it had a charming facade with balconies that overlooked a cobblestone street. I had always imagined Montmartre as an idyllic quarter of Paris, where artists gathered at sidewalk cafes and the Basilica of Sacré-Cœur loomed over the city. Even though it was late in the day, I felt a quiet thrill stepping out of the taxi and smelling the mix of fresh bread, roasted coffee, and a hint of rain in the cool air. I carried my luggage to the check-in desk, greeted by a woman named Marie. Marie wore a polite smile. She handed me an old-fashioned brass key instead of a keycard. She apologized if the hotel felt understaffed that evening. She also whispered that things might be different in the coming days, and that I should keep an eye on any official announcements. I nodded, not entirely sure what she meant. Before I went upstairs, she added that if I needed anything, I should call the front desk immediately. The emphasis in her tone made me think she was serious about something that went beyond standard hospitality. My room was small but cozy, with a large window overlooking the street. I could see the distant dome of Sacré-Cœur if I leaned out at the right angle. I left my suitcase by the bed, splashed water on my face, and decided I needed a short walk before sleeping. Jet lag was creeping in, but I wanted to get a feel for the neighborhood. I found a small cafe still open, ordered a sandwich, and listened for any local news. People at surrounding tables spoke in hushed tones, occasionally casting glances at passing police cars. I caught fragments of conversation. Someone mentioned an incident near the Seine. Another brought up the word infection, and a pair of anxious tourists asked a waiter if there had been an official advisory. I returned to the hotel around 9 that night, thoroughly exhausted. The hallways were quiet. I made sure to latch my door. That night I slept fitfully. Sometime around 2 in the morning, I heard a brief commotion in the street. It sounded like a car horn and shouts, but I was too groggy to investigate. When I woke up, I checked my phone. A barrage of notifications greeted me, including a few from friends back home, asking if everything was all right. Confused, I opened one of their messages. My friend Connor wrote, "Dan, saw on the news something's happening in Paris. Are you safe?" I didn't know what he meant, so I quickly checked an international news site. The top headline was about a mysterious outbreak in multiple Paris neighborhoods. The article described reports of individuals displaying aggression and odd symptoms. Words like zombie-like behavior appeared, though the piece clarified that the term was being used unofficially by eyewitnesses, not by medical experts. They suspected some kind of virus, possibly spread through close contact. A photograph accompanied the article, showing police officers wearing protective gear near the Eiffel Tower. This was entirely different from any trip scenario I'd imagined. Nevertheless, I tried to stay calm. I had heard rumors of unusual outbreaks before, and many turned out to be overhyped. It was possible the situation was localized, or that the news was sensationalizing small incidents. I decided to head downstairs for breakfast and gather any information from the hotel staff. The lobby was tense. Marie was at the front desk, but there was no sign of other employees. A young man who looked like a manager was in a corner, speaking in hushed tones with a uniformed security guard. Marie greeted me with a faint smile and asked if I'd slept well. I told her I was fine, but curious about what was happening in the city. She glanced at the security guard, who briefly turned his gaze in our direction. Marie explained there had been some disruptions overnight, and local authorities were advising people to stay indoors as much as possible until more information came in. When I asked about the rumors of a virus, she confirmed that there had been official statements about an infection causing violent behavior in certain areas. The authorities were calling it a public health situation and requesting calm. The word zombie was floating around in social media, but obviously that wasn't an official classification. I ate a quick breakfast in the hotel lounge and looked out the window. In daylight, Montmartre still appeared beautiful. The narrow streets, the old buildings, the lampposts lined with small posters. It almost felt normal. Yet the street was unusually empty, with only a few pedestrians hurriedly moving along. I saw a couple of police vans parked by the sidewalk, their lights off, and officers speaking with each other through open windows. The manager, a man named Emile, approached me. He spoke good English and asked if I had any plans to explore the city that day. I told him that was originally the plan, but now I wasn't so sure. He nodded, explaining that many tourist sites were either shut down or operating with restrictions. He suggested I remain at the hotel until there was an official update. Around midday, the noises outside became louder. Sirens echoed through the streets. Doors were locked. I saw a few shops pulling down metal shutters, and many cafes had no outside customers. The staff at the hotel seemed on edge, whispering about possibly barricading the entrance if the infection spread. They used the word virus frequently, speculating about whether it was airborne or primarily transmitted through physical contact. Emile, the manager, asked me and a few other guests to gather in the lounge so he could give us an update. There were 5 of us. Me, a couple from Italy named Luca, and Serena, a British business traveller named Nia, and an older gentleman from Lyon named Bernard, who was in Paris to visit family. Emile assured us that the hotel had enough supplies for a couple of days, but he recommended we consider rationing water and food if the municipal services became disrupted. He stated that the nearest hospital was overwhelmed with patients showing flu-like symptoms, and some were exhibiting aggressive tendencies. Marie, who stood by his side, read a brief statement from local authorities. Remain indoors, keep doors locked, and avoid direct contact with anyone showing signs of fever or unusual aggression. When she said the word aggression, she glanced at Bernard, who looked pale. He claimed he felt fine, just a bit stressed. The rest of us nodded in tense agreement. Out of curiosity and perhaps a misguided sense of adventure, I asked if it would be feasible to step out just for a moment to see how things were. Emile shook his head. He said it was better to observe from the upper floors if I wanted a clearer view. The rooftops in Montmartre sometimes provided a line of sight across the city. He also mentioned that some residents were climbing out onto balconies and rooftops to communicate with neighbors, since phone lines were getting jammed. I returned to my room and opened the window to look out. From my vantage point, I saw something I'll never forget. A man stumbled along the street. His clothes were dirty, and he walked with an unsteady gait. At first, I assumed he might be intoxicated or unwell. Then he moved toward a parked car, pressed his face against the window, and let out a muffled moan. He scratched at the glass as if trying to reach whatever was inside. When a nearby police officer approached, the man turned abruptly. Even from a distance, I noticed the officer's expression shift from cautious to horrified. The man lunged forward in a way that didn't look normal. The officer backed off, shouting commands in French, but the man kept coming. The officer eventually guided him to the ground with the help of a second officer. They restrained him, carefully avoiding skin contact. Another policeman hurried to the site wearing gloves, helping them lift the man into a van. The scene lasted less than 2 minutes, but it left me uneasy. This was happening just a few feet away from where I stood, in a popular tourist district. It wasn't some sensational news report or an exaggerated rumor. Something was truly wrong. By late afternoon, the hotel began its own lockdown procedure. Emile and Marie spoke to every guest individually, explaining that the front doors would be locked, and only staff with a key could let people in or out. They recommended that we stay in our rooms or in the lounge area if we needed company. The power and water still worked, but the staff had no idea how long that would last. They also mentioned that the local authorities had set up barricades in certain parts of Montmartre. No official explanation was given, just a general statement about restricting movement to contain a public health crisis. Luca and Serena, the Italian couple, said they wanted to see if they could catch a train out of the city. They believed it might be wiser to be home in Italy than trapped in a strange place. Emile informed them that many train lines were suspended, and even if they reached the station, there was no guarantee they could find a ride. The tension was thick in the lounge. We all tried to remain composed. Marie clicked through various news stations on the television. Each channel showed something similar: lines outside hospitals, footage of people wandering the streets in disoriented states, and interviews with medical experts who admitted they didn't fully understand the virus. They theorized it might be a mutated form of a known infection, but the aggression was unprecedented. The broadcaster on one channel hesitated to use the word zombie, but eyewitness accounts kept describing individuals who lost ordinary reasoning, resorting to biting or clawing. Bernard, the older gentleman from Lyon, paced around the lounge, rubbing his temples. He said he had a daughter who lived near the 18th arrondissement and needed to check on her. Emile recommended he wait until morning, hoping more official guidance would come overnight. Bernard reluctantly agreed. That evening, nobody talked much. The staff prepared a simple meal of bread, cheese, and a bit of fruit. The supply of fresh items was limited. A few of us tried to call or message loved ones with varying success. Phone lines were overwhelmed, and the Wi-Fi kept dropping intermittently. Through the windows, I could see more police vehicles patrolling. At one point, I noticed a crowd of people rushing downhill, some of them stumbling. Others chased them, moving in a slow but relentless manner. It looked like a surreal scene from a film, but it was real, right there on the street below. Some of the fleeing people banged on doors, trying to find shelter. Doors remained locked. Nobody wanted to risk the infection. It was an image that stayed in my mind long after I tried to close the blinds. Late that night, I heard footsteps in the hallway. I quietly opened my door a crack. Marie and another staff member, Jacques, were heading to the stairwell, carrying flashlights. Curious, I followed at a distance. They opened the door to a small maintenance room on the ground floor, rummaging through boxes. I heard them talk about safety equipment and possibly something to barricade windows in case individuals outside tried to break in. I stepped forward and Marie noticed me. She sighed, then told me the situation outside was getting more serious. Some infected individuals had been spotted just a block away. The authorities had set up a barricade at a major intersection, but nobody knew how long it would hold. Jacques pulled out some wooden planks, nails, and tools, preparing to reinforce the hotel's lower windows. He asked me if I knew how to hammer a nail. With few other ways to help, I nodded. Over the next couple of hours, Jacques, myself, and 2 other guests helped secure the windows in the lobby. We moved furniture to block any direct entrances. The effort was tense but oddly methodical. Everyone understood that this was necessary. Several times we paused to listen. Sometimes we heard nothing but distant sirens. Other times faint cries or muffled footsteps reached our ears through the glass. By the time we finished, it was almost 3 in the morning. Emile thanked everyone and suggested we get some rest. We trudged back to our rooms, uncertain about how the next day would unfold. I woke up to the muffled sound of a television broadcast. I got dressed quickly and headed downstairs. Luca and Serena were sitting at a small table, their eyes locked on the screen. The news anchor spoke in French, but subtitles in English scrolled along the bottom. The broadcast mentioned an expanding quarantine zone. Reports indicated that infected individuals were in multiple arrondissements, not just Montmartre. Nia, the business traveller from the UK, entered the lounge and asked if anyone had tried to go outside. Emile appeared and informed us that it was too dangerous. He mentioned that a few infected persons had roamed down our street early in the morning and the police had managed to push them back. However, the official instruction was clear: do not venture outdoors. At that moment, Bernard suddenly emerged from the staircase. He had changed into casual clothes and carried a small suitcase. He announced that he was leaving to find his daughter, who lived not far from the hotel. Emile tried to stop him, explaining that it was risky. Bernard insisted that he couldn't remain idle any longer. His daughter had not answered his calls, and he needed to ensure her safety. The rest of us exchanged looks. We understood Bernard's concern, but the situation outside was uncertain. Ultimately, Bernard pushed past the barricaded door after Emile reluctantly unlatched it. We watched him step onto the street, glancing left and right. Then he set off up the hill. We never saw Bernard again. Throughout the day, we heard occasional loud noises from outside. Vehicles accelerating, someone yelling for help, a helicopter passing overhead. Marie peeked through a gap in the boarded windows and whispered that she could see small groups of infected individuals wandering aimlessly. Now and then, a resident would sprint from one doorway to another, trying to avoid being spotted. We tried to keep ourselves busy. The power still worked, though we had no idea for how long. The internet was spotty, making it difficult to get reliable information. Local TV channels repeated the same statements about staying indoors, awaiting medical teams, and reporting any sightings of infected people. By the afternoon, our supplies began to worry us. Emile took an inventory of the hotel's pantry. We had enough bottled water to last a few days if we rationed it carefully. The food situation was a bit more dire. Most of it required refrigeration, and we had limited fresh items. If we lost power, it would spoil quickly. We discussed the possibility of venturing outside to find a nearby grocery store. The idea was risky, So we postponed that plan, hoping for a better moment. Luca and Serena told us they had tried calling the Italian embassy, but nobody picked up. They sent emails, also receiving no reply. With public transportation offline or unsafe, they were stuck. Nia hoped her company might arrange an emergency evacuation, but had heard nothing from her manager. Everyone felt stranded, and the unknown factors fueled our anxiety. Around 5 in the evening, a frantic knocking came at the hotel's front entrance. We all froze. Marie motioned us to stay silent while she crept to a gap in the boarded window. A young woman stood outside, her face streaked with tears, wearing a torn jacket. She begged for help in French, repeating that her brother was hurt nearby. She seemed distressed, but not infected. Emile hesitated, knowing that opening the door could invite danger. We watched from inside, unsure what to do. Finally, Emile decided we couldn't leave her out there. He loosened some of the barricade and opened the door just wide enough to let her in. She stumbled inside, thanking us repeatedly. Her name was Elodie, a local resident. She explained that her brother, Adrien, was around the corner, lying on the street. He had fallen while running away from an infected group. She didn't think he was bitten, just injured, but she couldn't get him to move on her own. A heated debate erupted among the guests and staff. Some argued that assisting people outside put us at risk. Others believed we couldn't just ignore someone in need. Eventually, Jacques and Emile agreed to accompany Elodie to see if Adrien was still alive and uninfected. They asked if anyone else would come to help carry him. I volunteered, feeling conflicted but unable to ignore a plea for assistance. We exited carefully, scanning the street. The sun was dipping below the rooftops, casting long shadows. Broken glass littered the cobblestones. A few storefronts had smashed windows. We could hear faint moans in the distance. Elodie led us around the corner to a smaller side street. Her brother lay against a wall, clutching his ankle. He groaned softly. When he saw us, he tried to speak but couldn't manage much. I helped him stand while Jacques supported his other side. We began walking back to the hotel. Emile and Elodie kept watch, staying a few steps ahead in case we needed to run. Suddenly, we heard a scraping sound. At the far end of the street, 2 figures emerged from behind a parked van. They moved slowly, arms slack at their sides, eyes distant. Their clothes were stained with something dark. Their expressions were vacant. Emile motioned for us to hurry. The figures let out strange vocalizations and started in our direction. They didn't run. They just moved forward with deliberate steps. Adrenaline surged through me. We moved as quickly as we could with Adrien, who could barely put weight on his injured leg. Elodie clutched her brother's arm, whispering that we would make it. The 2 infected individuals drew closer, their pace steady. Jacques and I practically dragged Adrien along. The final few meters to the hotel door felt endless. We could see Nia and Serena peering from inside, urging us to come faster. The 2 infected were maybe 20 feet behind us, unyielding. Emile and Elodie slipped inside first, then Jacques and I maneuvered Adrien through the narrow gap. The moment our feet crossed the threshold, Nia and Serena slammed the door shut and reinforced the barricade. We collapsed into the lobby, breathing heavily. Adrien let out a pained grunt, but thanked us. His ankle looked swollen. Marie and Serena immediately attended to him, grabbing a first aid kit from the front desk. Emile and Jacques went to check if the infected had reached the door. Through the boards, they could see the silhouettes pressing against the glass. We were relieved that the door held. Adrien was placed in a small side room that normally served as a coat check area. He was in pain but coherent. We asked him repeatedly if any infected individuals had touched or bitten him, and he said no. He had merely tripped and sprained his ankle while running. Elodie stood by him, thanking everyone for their kindness. She explained that Montmartre was nearly unrecognizable. Shops were closed, families locked themselves indoors, and infected people wandered aimlessly. Over the next few hours, we tried to devise a plan. The infection didn't seem to have an official cure, and the authorities hadn't provided a timeline for rescue. A rumor circulated on social media that the government was planning a citywide quarantine for all of Paris. If true, that meant we might be cut off indefinitely. Jacques suggested we search the surrounding buildings for supplies, but the risk was obvious. Emile preferred to wait a bit longer, hoping to hear about an evacuation or to see some sign of organized response in the streets. The majority of us sided with caution. We had limited resources, but leaving the hotel felt more dangerous. We decided to stay put at least until morning. Night fell again, and with it came an unsettling quiet outside. We occasionally caught sight of movement through the gaps in the boarded windows. A few times we thought we heard footsteps or faint moans. Tension spread among the group. Naya and Luca tried to keep a semblance of normalcy by making a round of instant coffee in the lounge. Nobody truly relaxed, but we sat together, discussing anything but the current situation in an attempt to distract our thoughts. The next day brought harsh realities. The power started flickering in the morning, and the water pressure decreased. Clearly, Paris's infrastructure was strained. Emile turned on a small radio the hotel kept for emergencies, and we managed to catch a brief bulletin. The announcer confirmed that parts of the city were without power. Official teams were working to stabilize the grid, but the infection had disrupted many services. There was an appeal for everyone to stay inside. As before, there was no mention of an immediate rescue or a plan to contain the virus beyond quarantines. Jacques revealed that the hotel had a backup generator in the basement, mostly for emergency lighting. It wouldn't power everything, but it might keep a few essentials running if the main supply failed. We all agreed that it was crucial to have some light at night. Montmartre's streets had been dark the previous evening, making everything more difficult to monitor. In the late morning, I mustered the courage to climb up to the rooftop terrace. It wasn't normally accessible to guests, but Emile allowed it under the circumstances. From up there, I could see a panoramic view of the area. The Basilica of Sacré-Cœur stood in the distance, its white dome brilliant against the sky. Surrounding streets looked abandoned, except for occasional clusters of infected individuals shuffling around. Smoke rose from a few scattered fires, possibly cars that had been set ablaze or damaged. Sirens were sporadic. An eerie hush hung over Montmartre, broken only by the wind. I realized how quickly a bustling cityscape could transform into a place of fear. I had expected to be visiting museums, snapping photos, enjoying croissants at sidewalk cafes. Instead, I was on a rooftop scanning for threats. That afternoon, tensions within our makeshift group became more apparent. We were different people under one roof, all dealing with stress in our own ways. Luca and Serena argued with Emile about the possibility of leaving to find a safer zone, or at least locate an embassy official. They felt that waiting inside the hotel was a bad plan. Emile countered that going outside without reliable transport was more dangerous. Nia tried to calm them. She argued that we at least had shelter and a small amount of food. If we left, we might not find anything better, and we could end up stranded on the street. Jacques noted that the infected were multiplying, or at least more of them were in the open now. Without a clear route or vehicle, traveling was a gamble. Amid the raised voices, Marie reminded everyone that we needed to remain united. She pointed out that no matter what we chose to do, we had to help one another. Disagreements only made it more difficult to survive. Eventually, the group decided that staying put was still the best option, but we needed more supplies. Food was dwindling, and water remained a concern. We planned a short excursion to a grocery store that was only a few blocks away. Jacques had some experience with the neighborhood and believed there was a small local market that might have been left locked up or possibly abandoned. We hoped to find bottled water, canned goods, and medical items. We formed a team of 3, me, Jacques, and Emile. We agreed to go at dawn the next day, believing the streets might be emptier. The rest would remain behind to watch over the hotel and care for Adrien, who still had a swollen ankle. That night, we prepared by gathering small backpacks, a few tools, and anything that could be used defensively if necessary. We had nothing like actual weapons, but Jacques found a sturdy metal rod in the maintenance room, and Emile had a hammer. At the break of dawn, The three of us slipped out of the hotel. The street was silent. We moved in single file, scanning every doorway and intersection. A few times, we saw silhouettes in the distance, but they didn't appear to notice us. As we walked, we passed scenes of chaos from previous days: overturned trash bins, broken glass, a scorched vehicle that still smelled faintly of burned rubber. After a few tense minutes, we reached the small market. The door was closed, but the window to the side was shattered. Emile muttered a quick comment about how it looked like people had tried to force their way in. We cautiously climbed through the broken glass. Inside, the store was dark. The shelves were partially emptied, likely looted by neighbors over the past few days. We found a few canned items, some boxes of dried pasta, and a couple of half-full water jugs. We carefully collected what we could carry. Jacques ventured into a back room, searching for medical supplies. He emerged with a small stash of bandages and antiseptic. We were relieved to have found at least something. Then we heard a strange thump from somewhere near the frozen foods section, which was in darkness. Emile shone a flashlight over the freezers. The flicker of light revealed a figure crouching beside an overturned shelf. At first, we couldn't tell if it was an infected individual or a survivor. Then it moved in a way that suggested a lack of coordination, as if it was struggling to stand, but not in a normal manner. Emile whispered that we should head for the exit. Jacques gripped his metal rod more tightly. We backed away, trying not to make noise. The figure heard us anyway. It made a hollow rasping sound and staggered forward. In the faint beam of the flashlight, we saw its eyes. They seemed unfocused. Its limbs moved without balance, but it was determined in our direction. We turned to rush out, and Jacques swung the metal rod behind him in a defensive maneuver. The figure stumbled but continued to follow. We ducked through the broken window, clambering over shards of glass with our bags of supplies. Once on the street, we moved quickly. The figure emerged from the market's entrance, arms outstretched. It let out a low moan. We hurried around the corner, taking a different route back to the hotel to avoid being followed. Upon returning, we reported what happened. Our supplies were modest, but might extend our survival a bit longer. Everyone showed relief, although the mood remained sober. This was not an adventure. It felt like an ongoing crisis with no end in sight. The following days blurred into a routine of anxious waiting. We kept watch on the streets through small openings between planks. We listened to the radio when we could get a signal. We shared small meals together, discussing possible strategies for escaping the city. Multiple rumors floated through the air. Some claimed the army was setting up checkpoints. Others mentioned helicopters extracting people from rooftops, but we had no confirmation. Adrian's ankle improved slightly, and he could hobble around with a makeshift crutch. Elodie stayed close by him, assisting him with even the smallest tasks. Whenever we needed to fix something in the hotel, like a flickering light or a stuck window, Jacques and I did our best to handle it. Emile tried to keep morale up, though it was clear the situation outside was dire. At one point, we heard loud noises from the basilica area. Multiple voices shouted, followed by a series of popping sounds that might have been tear gas canisters or some other form of crowd control. We never discovered the full story, but the city seemed to be unraveling day by day. Finally, after nearly a week of confinement, the group faced a critical decision. Our supplies were almost gone. The water had become unreliable, with occasional brownish spurts from the tap. The small generator in the basement was running low on fuel, meaning we would soon lose our last reliable source of light. We had to make a choice: stay and hope for official rescue, or attempt to leave Montmartre in search of something more stable. Arguments broke out again. Luca insisted on going toward the outskirts of Paris, believing smaller towns might be safer and less crowded. Serena agreed. Nia felt we should head towards the city center, guessing that large-scale relief efforts would be concentrated there. Emile was torn, not wanting to abandon the hotel, which was his livelihood. Marie also hesitated, torn between loyalty to the hotel and the logic that rescue might be found elsewhere. In the end, we split into two groups. Luca, Serena, and Nia believed they had more stamina for a dangerous journey, so they planned to head west, hoping to cross the city limits. Emile, Marie, and Jacques wanted to remain in the hotel a bit longer, hoping for an official evacuation. Elodie and Adrien also decided to stay, given Adrien's injury. I stood at a crossroads. I thought about my life in Vancouver, my family and friends, and how badly I wanted to return home. Yet I was uncertain if it was wise to leave. After some deliberation, I decided to remain with Emile's group. I wasn't sure if that was the right call, but the idea of braving the entire city on foot without any clear direction felt too uncertain. We all said subdued goodbyes. Nia gave me her business card, asking me to contact her if I ever managed to get back online. Luca and Serena exchanged hugs with everyone, promising they'd try to send help if they found any. With backpacks and a vague plan, they exited the hotel. We watched through the boards as they disappeared down the street. In the days that followed, the city's condition only worsened. We occasionally heard about small bands of survivors, armed with whatever they could find, moving through Montmartre. We rarely opened the door, except to gather rainwater in buckets when possible. The infected presence remained a constant threat, roaming the streets in small groups. Emile and Marie did their best to keep everyone coordinated. Jacques inspected the backup generator daily, rationing its use so we could have a little light at night. Elodie helped Adrien exercise his leg, gradually improving his mobility. Nobody came to the hotel's door asking for help anymore. We guessed that most uninfected residents had either fled or hidden themselves. I thought about home every day, wondering if my friends and family saw the news, if they knew I was stuck in Montmartre. My phone was useless most of the time, though I turned it on occasionally, hoping for a signal or a newscast. I recorded a short video journal just in case, describing the events and the location of the hotel. My battery eventually drained, and we had no reliable way to recharge it beyond the generator we were saving for lights. About 10 days after I first arrived in Paris, we heard a distant rumble from the south. It sounded like heavy vehicles, possibly armored trucks or tanks. The noise persisted for an hour or two. We cautiously climbed to the rooftop again. In the distance, we saw what looked like a convoy moving through the streets. It was too far away to be certain. Could it be the military, or perhaps an organized effort by the police? We waited and watched. The vehicles vanished behind a maze of buildings, and we never learned their exact purpose. Later that evening, Emile caught a brief radio transmission mentioning an attempt by the French military to secure key districts. We wondered if Montmartre was considered a priority, or if the city's authorities had spread themselves too thin. Despite everything, a subtle determination settled in among our small group. We realized we had survived longer than many. There might be an eventual resolution, perhaps a mass evacuation or a medical breakthrough. The fear of the infection remained, but we had each other to rely on, at least for the moment. As I write this account from the upper floor of Hotel Lumière Montmartre, the city remains under the grip of this virus outbreak. Every day brings new challenges, from finding ways to collect water to staying out of sight of the infected. We don't know if Luca, Serena, and Nia made it to safety. We haven't seen or heard from Bernard since he left to find his daughter. I came to Montmartre to admire art, stroll through quaint streets, and experience the magic of Paris. Instead, I found myself in the midst of something beyond comprehension, a virus that turned ordinary people into something unrecognizable. News outlets still use the word zombie informally, reflecting the dramatic changes in behavior. Specialists might argue over terminology, but for those of us living through it, it is very real. Despite the fear and uncertainty, we are doing our best to endure. We share food sparingly, boil what water we can, and keep watch each night in shifts. Sometimes, I stand by the boarded window, peering through a gap, and see a still street illuminated by a flickering street lamp. Occasionally, an infected person wanders by, drawn to random sounds or movements. I'm not sure how this will end. Perhaps the virus will burn itself out, or the authorities will eventually regain control. Maybe we'll learn to navigate the city's rooftops and discover pockets of survivors banding together. It's also possible we'll be forced to abandon the hotel if resources run out. All I know is that for now, I'm alive, surrounded by people who chose compassion over isolation. Emile and Marie continue to coordinate everything they can. Jacques keeps the generator running, and Elodie and Adrian remain hopeful that the city they love will recover. We hold on to whatever optimism we can muster. If anyone ever finds this account, know that Montmartre, once filled with art and music, became a place of boarded windows and whispered conversations. The virus outbreak changed everything, forcing us to adapt to a new reality. We are determined to survive, one day at a time, even if the rest of the world only knows this event as a frightening tale. I arrived in France as a tourist, excited to enjoy the sights. Instead, I witnessed how quickly society can break down when confronted with a virus that no one fully understands. This is a story of survival, cooperation, and the lengths people will go to protect each other. And it all began the moment I checked into a small hotel in Montmartre, on what was supposed to be a simple, carefree vacation. That's all for now. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe for more unsettling creepypastas. Your support keeps my channel alive. Until next time, stay quiet, stay vigilant, and trust nothing, not even the silence.